Hi guys and welcome to Crazy Pepper Revenge. This channel is all about crazy true stories, stuff that happens in real life when things get a little bit messy.
The sound of my own car keys hitting the picnic table cut through the summer air like a slap. I watched them bounce once, twice, then settle next to the potato salad my mother had spent all morning making. The metal clinked against the glass dish with a finality that seemed to echo in my chest. "You're not a real man, you're just a walking ATM," Greg Paulson announced to the entire backyard barbecue, dangling his beer bottle like a trophy. My brother-in-law had just climbed out of my Honda Civic, the one I'd been looking for all week, and now stood there grinning like he'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. The laughter started with my sister Vanessa. Her cackle pierced the afternoon heat, sharp and delighted. She slapped Greg's arm playfully like he was the most clever man alive. "Oh my God, Greg, you're terrible." But she was still laughing, still looking at me, like I was the family pet who'd just done something embarrassing. My father joined in next, that low chuckle he'd perfected over 30 years of marriage to my mother. "Well, Danny's always been the generous type," he said, raising his beer in a mock toast. Even my mother smiled behind her hand, trying to hide it but not quite managing. The neighbors who'd been invited, the Hendersons from next door, the young couple from down the street whose names I could never remember, they all laughed too. Because what else do you do when someone makes a joke at a family barbecue? You laugh along. You don't want to be the one who ruins the mood. I felt my face arrange itself into what I hoped looked like good humor. I let out a short laugh myself, one quick breath that barely qualified as amusement. I nodded once, like I was acknowledging a particularly clever observation about the weather. Then I turned and walked away. Not dramatically, not with any grand pronouncements or slammed doors. I just walked across the lawn, past the smoking grill where my father had been holding court, over the hamburgers, past the folding chairs arranged in a careful circle, past the cooler full of beer that I'd bought and brought over that morning. I walked to the front yard, down the driveway, and to the bus stop on Maple Street. The number 47 bus was running late, as usual. I stood there in my khakis and polo shirt, the uniform of suburban weekend gatherings, and listened to the distant sound of laughter floating from the backyard. Someone had turned up the radio. Jimmy Buffett was singing about cheeseburgers in paradise. When the bus finally wheezed to a stop, I climbed aboard and found a window seat 3 rows back. The vinyl was cracked and patched with duct tape, but it would do. As we pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of my parents' house in the side mirror. The party was still going strong. My phone buzzed twice during the 20-minute ride home. Text messages, probably from Vanessa or my mother, wondering where I'd gone. I didn't check them. Instead, I stared out the window at the familiar streets of Millbrook Heights, thinking about the sound those keys had made when they hit the table. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd made a decision. Not a dramatic one. I'm not the dramatic type. Just a quiet, methodical decision that felt as natural as breathing. I was going to open a ledger. You see, everyone at that barbecue saw exactly what Greg wanted them to see. Danny Morrison, the quiet accountant. The soft-spoken guy who never made waves, never raised his voice, never said no when family needed a favor. The walking ATM, as Greg had so eloquently put it. What they didn't see was the other side of my job description, the part that came after certified public accountant on my business cards. The part that read forensic auditor, IRS Criminal Investigation Division, contract specialist. For the past 8 years, I'd been the guy they called when someone was hiding money. When state senators were skimming from campaign funds. When construction companies were billing for materials they'd never bought. When insurance claims didn't add up and someone needed to follow the paper trail all the way to the truth. I was very, very good at finding money that people thought they'd hidden. And over the past 5 years, Greg Paulson had taken a lot of my money. My apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a single guy who spent most of his time buried in spreadsheets. Clean, organized, and slightly depressing. The furniture came from IKEA, the art from Target, and the personality from nowhere in particular. But the home office was a different story entirely. 3 monitors arranged in a perfect arc. Filing cabinets that locked. A scanner that could handle everything from business cards to legal documents. And a safe built into the wall behind a framed print of dogs playing poker. My one concession to humor in an otherwise sterile space. I sat down at my desk and opened a new file on my computer. Paulson Gregory James went at the top. Date of birth, social security number, current address, All information I'd gathered over the years for various family forms and emergency contacts. Amazing how much data you accumulate about someone when you're related by marriage. Then I started pulling out the real files, the physical ones, stored in the locked cabinet to my right. The first folder was labeled Vehicle Loan, Honda Civic 2019. Purchase price $22,147. Down payment $5,000, paid by me because Greg was between jobs and Vanessa was starting her boutique. Monthly payments $387, paid by me for the past 18 months because the boutique was still getting established. Total paid so far $12,909. The second folder contained the paperwork for Vanessa's boutique loan. Trendy Threads was supposed to be her dream come true, a small clothing store in the downtown shopping district. The bank had required a co-signer with good credit. Greg's credit was, to put it charitably, problematic. Loan amount $45,000, guaranteed by me. Monthly payments $620, paid by me for the past 2 years because the boutique was having a slow season that apparently lasted 24 months. Total paid so far $14,952. The third folder was the thickest. It contained 5 years' worth of emergency loans to Greg and Vanessa. The time their rent was due and Greg's construction business had a cash flow problem. The time Vanessa needed dental work and their insurance had lapsed. The time Greg's truck broke down and he needed money for repairs. The time they were going to lose their apartment if they didn't come up with 2 months' rent immediately. Each loan had been requested with tears, promises, and detailed explanations of how this was absolutely the last time they'd need help. Each loan had been documented with handwritten IOUs that Greg signed with a flourish, like his signature was worth something. None had been repaid. Total loaned $47,892. I pulled out my calculator and added it all up. Vehicle payments, business loan payments, emergency loans, plus interest calculated at the modest rate of 5% annually. Grand total, $127,800. I leaned back in my chair and stared at that number. Nearly $130,000. More than I had spent on my college education, more than most people made in 2 years. All of it flowing from my bank account to Greg's various needs and schemes, one emergency at a time. And today, he'd stood in my parents' backyard, holding my car keys, and called me a walking ATM while everyone laughed. I opened a new spreadsheet and began entering data. Not just the loans and payments, but everything I could remember about Greg's business operations. The construction company he'd started 3 years ago with money I'd loaned him. The contracts he bragged about at family dinners. The employees he claimed to have. The equipment he said he was buying. I'd been listening to Greg's stories for years, filing them away in the back of my mind, without really thinking about them. But now, as I typed, patterns began to emerge. Greg claimed to have 12 full-time employees, but he'd asked me for help making payroll taxes just 6 months ago. He said his company had landed a $200,000 school renovation contract, but he'd needed to borrow money for materials. He drove a new Ford F-250 with his company logo on the side, but he'd used my car for the past week because his truck was in the shop. None of it added up. I pulled up the state contractor licensing website and searched for Paulson Construction LLC. The license was active, but barely. Greg had been cited twice for incomplete work and once for using unlicensed subcontractors. His bonding company had dropped him 8 months ago, which meant he couldn't legally bid on any public projects. Yet he'd been telling everyone about his big government contracts. I clicked over to the Secretary of State's business registry and looked up his LLC filing. Greg was listed as the sole owner and registered agent. The business address was a UPS store mailbox downtown. The phone number went to a Google Voice account. His construction company was essentially a post office box and a cell phone. But the money was real. The money he'd taken from me, spent on his truck and his tools, and his lifestyle was very real indeed. I saved the spreadsheet and closed my laptop. Tomorrow was Monday, which meant I'd be back at my real job, helping the government find money that people thought they'd hidden. Tonight, I was going to start finding my own. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made everyone in the office move a little slower and speak a little quieter. I sat at my desk in the federal building downtown, surrounded by the familiar chaos of an IRS Criminal Investigation Division workspace, towers of bankers' boxes, whiteboards covered in flowcharts and phone numbers, and the constant hum of conversations about money that had gone missing. My official caseload included a restaurant owner who'd been skimming cash for 3 years, and a small-town mayor who'd apparently confused the municipal emergency fund with his personal checking account. But during my lunch break, I worked on something else entirely. I pulled up the state database of construction permits and ran a search for Paulson Construction. In the past year, Greg had pulled permits for 7 different projects around the city. Residential renovations mostly, with a couple of small commercial jobs mixed in. The permits listed project values totaling $340,000. For a guy who needed to borrow money for groceries, that seemed like a lot of work. I cross-referenced the permit addresses with property records and found the homeowners' names. Then I did something that was technically within my authority as a federal investigator, but probably not in the spirit of using government resources for personal matters. I ran background checks on all of them. What I found was interesting. 3 of the homeowners had filed complaints with the Better Business Bureau. 2 had left negative reviews on Google, describing work that was started but never finished, deposits that disappeared, and a contractor who stopped returning phone calls. 1 had filed a lawsuit in small claims court, seeking return of an $8,000 down payment for a kitchen renovation that never happened. Greg wasn't just bad at business. He was actively defrauding his customers. I made copies of everything and stored them in a new folder in my home filing system. Then I made a phone call. Millbrook Heights Police Department, Detective Bureau. This is Danny Morrison with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I need to speak with someone about filing a complaint for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. The desk sergeant transferred me to Detective Sarah Chen, who sounded like she'd rather be doing anything else than taking a report about a stolen car from someone's brother-in-law. Let me get this straight, she said after I'd explained the situation. Your sister's husband has been driving your car for a week without permission, and you want to file charges? The vehicle is registered in my name. I hold the title and pay the insurance. Mr. Paulson took the keys without asking and has refused to return the vehicle when requested. That meets the legal definition of unauthorized use. There was a long pause. This is a family dispute, Mr. Morrison. Maybe you should talk to a lawyer instead of getting the police involved. Detective Chen, if a stranger took my car without permission and refused to give it back, would that be a crime? Well, yes. But then the relationship between myself and the perpetrator is irrelevant to the legal question. I'm filing a complaint for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. I can come to the station this afternoon to complete the paperwork. Another pause. Fine. Be here at 3 o'clock. Bring your registration and insurance documents. I hung up and immediately called my insurance company. Geico's fraud hotline was surprisingly easy to navigate, and the investigator I spoke with was very interested to learn that someone had been driving my insured vehicle without permission for over a week. We'll need to open a claim investigation, she told me. If Mr. Paulson has an accident while driving your vehicle without authorization, it could void your coverage. We'll be sending him a cease and desist letter by certified mail today. Perfect. My next call was to First National Bank, where I held the car loan. The customer service representative was sympathetic when I explained that someone had taken my vehicle without permission, and I was concerned about the security of the collateral. We can flag the account for potential theft recovery, she said. If the vehicle isn't returned within 72 hours, we'll initiate repossession proceedings. The GPS tracker shows the car is currently parked at 1247 Riverside Drive, Unit 12. Is that your address? No, I said. That's where the unauthorized user lives. I see. We'll have our recovery team standing by. Greg's apartment complex was one of those sprawling developments built in the 1980s, all brown brick and brass fixtures that had seen better decades. Unit 12 was on the ground floor, and my Honda was parked right in front, looking exactly like what it was. A sensible car being driven by someone who had no business driving it. I took pictures from every angle, including close-ups of the new dents in the rear bumper and the cigarette burns in the upholstery. Greg had never been careful with other people's things. Then I called a locksmith. I need to have my car locks rekeyed, I told him. Someone's been driving it without permission, and I want to make sure they can't do it again. The locksmith was a cheerful guy named Pete, who'd apparently seen this kind of thing before. Family dispute? He asked as he worked on the driver's side door. Something like that. Yeah, I get a lot of these calls. Brother-in-law, ex-boyfriend, whatever. People think they can just take your stuff because you're related or you used to date. He finished with the locks and handed me 2 new keys. There you go. Old keys won't work anymore. I paid Pete in cash and drove my car home for the first time in 8 days. It felt strange to be behind the wheel again, like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten was missing. My phone started ringing before I'd even parked in my apartment complex's lot. Danny, what the hell? Greg's voice was loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I went out to get groceries and the car won't start. That's because it's not your car, Greg. Don't be a smartass. What did you do to it? I had the locks changed. The car is registered in my name, insured by me, and financed through my bank account. You've been driving it without permission. Without permission? Jesus Christ, Danny. We're family. You never said I couldn't borrow it. I never said you could borrow it either. In fact, I've been asking for it back all week. There was a pause. I could hear Vanessa in the background, her voice sharp with panic. Is he serious? Did he really lock us out of the car? This is ridiculous, Greg said. I need that car. Vanessa has to work tomorrow. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to humiliate me in front of my entire family. Oh, come on. That was just a joke. You can't be this upset about a joke. I thought about the spreadsheet on my computer. The 127,847 in loans and payments that Greg had never acknowledged, never thanked me for, never even pretended he intended to pay back. It wasn't a joke to me, I said, and hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off and went inside to make dinner. Tuesday morning brought the first real consequences of my decision to stop being a walking ATM. I was reviewing bank fraud cases in my office when my personal phone buzzed with a text message from Vanessa. Danny, we need to talk. Greg got arrested last night. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, for what? Driving without a license. He tried to take your car to work and got pulled over when it wouldn't start. The police said he was trying to break into a vehicle. This is insane. Actually, it was perfectly logical. Greg had been driving on a suspended license for 6 months, something I'd learned during my background check but hadn't mentioned to anyone. When Officer Martinez found him trying to jimmy the door of my Honda with a coat hanger, Greg couldn't produce a valid driver's license, registration, or proof of insurance. Because the car wasn't his. The attempted vehicle break-in charge would probably get dropped once Greg explained the family connection. But the driving on a suspended license was a different story. That was his 3rd offense, which made it a misdemeanor with potential jail time. I didn't respond to Vanessa's text. Instead, I made another phone call, this time to the bonding company that had dropped Greg's construction license. Millbrook Surety Group, this is Janet. Hi, Janet. This is Danny Morrison with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I'm calling about a contractor named Gregory Paulson. You provided bonding for his company until recently. Oh, God, don't tell me he's in trouble with the IRS, too. I'm not at liberty to discuss ongoing investigations, but I was hoping you could tell me why his bond was canceled. Janet sighed. 3 claims in 6 months. Homeowners who paid deposits and never got their work finished. We paid out nearly $20,000 before we finally dropped him. The guy's a walking liability. Do you have contact information for the claimants? I may need to interview them. I can email you the file. Fair warning, though, these people are angry, really angry. One of them hired a private investigator to track down Paulson's assets. That was interesting. What did the PI find? Not much. Paulson's got no real assets in his name. Lives in a rental, drives a leased truck. Business bank account never has more than a few $100s in it. Either he's hiding money really well, or he's spending it as fast as he steals it. I thanked Janet and hung up, then sat back in my chair to think. Greg was operating a classic Ponzi scheme, using deposits from new customers to pay for materials on previous jobs, always staying one step ahead of complete collapse. It was unsustainable, but it could work for a while if you had access to outside funding. Outside funding like a brother-in-law who never said no to a loan request. My computer chimed with an email from Janet containing Greg's bonding file. I printed everything and added it to my growing collection of evidence. Then I made one more call, this one to the State Contractor Licensing Board. Licensing and Regulation, this is Mike. This is Danny Morrison, IRS Criminal Investigation. I need to file a complaint about a licensed contractor who may be operating fraudulently. Mike took down all the details: the unpaid claims, the suspended driver's license, the pattern of taking deposits without completing work. He was particularly interested when I mentioned the unlicensed subcontractors and the expired bonding. "We'll open an investigation immediately," he said. "If even half of this checks out, Mr. Paulson's license will be suspended pending a formal hearing." "How long does that usually take?" "Emergency suspension? We can have it done by end of business today." I spent the rest of the morning working on my official cases, but my heart wasn't in it. Every few minutes, I found myself thinking about Greg sitting in a holding cell, trying to figure out how his carefully constructed house of cards had started falling down so quickly. Around noon, Vanessa called. "Danny, I know you're mad, but this has gone too far. Greg's in jail and I can't afford a lawyer. Mom says you won't return her calls." "I've been busy." "Busy? Your family's falling apart and you're busy?" I looked at the stack of files on my desk, all the evidence of Greg's fraudulent business practices and my own willingness to enable them. "My family fell apart 5 years ago, Vanessa. I'm just now noticing." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm tired of being the family ATM. It means I'm tired of paying for Greg's mistakes while he treats me like garbage. And it means I'm done pretending that any of this is normal." There was a long pause. "He didn't mean what he said at the barbecue. He was drunk." "He wasn't drunk at 10 in the morning, Vanessa. And he meant every word." "So what? You're going to destroy our lives over a stupid joke?" "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just not fixing it anymore." I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I walked to the break room and bought a Coke from the vending machine, something I hadn't done in months because I'd been too busy sending money to Greg and Vanessa to spend it on small luxuries. It tasted better than I remembered. By Thursday, the full scope of Greg's problems had become clear. His contractor's license had been suspended, his business bank account frozen pending investigation, and 3 more customers had filed complaints with the police. The local newspaper ran a small story about it in their business section: "Local contractor under investigation for fraud." I read it over coffee in my kitchen while rain drummed against the windows. The reporter had done her homework, tracking down interviews with 4 different homeowners who'd been scammed. The total amount of stolen deposits was approaching 35,000. My phone had been buzzing constantly for 2 days with calls from family members: Mom, Dad, Vanessa, even my Aunt Carol from Phoenix, who somehow heard about the situation. I'd ignored them all, but the voicemails were getting increasingly desperate. "Danny, this is your father. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this needs to stop. Greg made a mistake, but he's family. Call me back. Danny, it's Mom. Vanessa is beside herself. She's talking about losing the apartment. Whatever Greg did, surely it's not worth all this. Please call. Danny, you self-righteous prick. This is Greg. I know you're behind all this. The license suspension, the police complaints, all of it. You think you're so smart with your government job and your fancy computer skills? Well, congratulations. You've destroyed an entire family over a joke. I hope you're proud of yourself." That last message made me smile. Greg was finally starting to understand that actions have consequences. Friday afternoon, I got a call at work from Detective Chen. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted to update you on your vehicle theft complaint. Mr. Paulson has been charged with unauthorized use of a motor vehicle and driving on a suspended license. He's also facing additional charges related to his business practices." "What kind of additional charges?" "Fraud, theft by deception, violating the Contractor Licensing Act. Apparently, your complaint opened up a whole can of worms. The DA's office is very interested in talking to you." "About what?" "You've been financially supporting Mr. Paulson's business operations for several years, correct? The prosecutors want to understand the money trail. They think you might be an unknowing sufferer of his scheme." "An unknowing sufferer? I suppose that was one way to put it." "I'd be happy to cooperate with the investigation," I said. "Great. Can you come in Monday morning? Bring any financial records you have related to loans or payments to Mr. Paulson." I agreed and hung up, then spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about what I was going to tell the district attorney's office. The truth, obviously, but the truth was complicated. Yes, I'd been supporting Greg financially. No, I hadn't realized he was using my money to fund fraudulent business practices. But also, yes, I'd known something wasn't right, and I'd chosen to investigate rather than confront him directly. The line between sufferer and accomplice was thinner than I'd expected. Saturday morning, I was reorganizing my files when someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw my parents standing in the hallway, both of them looking older than I remembered. I opened the door. "Danny," my mother said, stepping forward like she wanted to hug me but wasn't sure if she should. "We need to talk." I let them in and offered coffee, which they accepted gratefully. We sat around my small dining table like strangers, all of us unsure how to begin a conversation that should have happened years ago. "Your sister is devastated," Mom said finally. "She's talking about moving back home. The boutique is closing, the apartment lease is up for renewal, and with Greg in jail—" "Greg's not in jail," I said. "He made bail yesterday. How did you—" "Never mind." Dad shook his head. "The point is, this family is falling apart. Over what? A stupid comment at a barbecue?" I got up and retrieved one of my files from the home office. The thick one, labeled Loans and Payments. Paulson. I set it on the table between us. "It's not about the comment," I said. "It's about this." I opened the file and spread out 5 years' worth of documentation. Bank statements showing transfers to Greg and Vanessa, copies of checks I'd written for their rent, their car payments, their business expenses, IOUs that had never been honored, payment records for loans I'd co-signed. "This is what I've given them over the past 5 years," I said. "Nearly $130,000. Not gifts, loans. With the understanding that they'd be paid back when Greg's business got established." My parents stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "I had no idea it was this much," Mom whispered. "Neither did I, until I added it all up. But here's the thing. I wouldn't have minded if Greg had just been honest about it. If he'd said, 'Danny, I'm struggling and I need help,' I would have kept helping. But instead, he's been lying to everyone about how successful his business is, while using my money to fund a scam that's hurt innocent people." I pulled out the newspaper clipping about the fraud investigation and the customer complaints from the bonding company. "He's been taking deposits from homeowners and not completing the work, using money from new customers to pay for materials on old jobs. It's a Ponzi scheme, and I've been unknowingly funding it." Dad picked up one of the bank statements, studying the long list of transfers. "Why didn't you tell us how much you were lending them?" "Because every time they asked, it was an emergency, and because I thought it was temporary. Greg kept saying the business was about to turn the corner, that he just needed to get through a rough patch." "But Danny," Mom said, "even if Greg made mistakes, he's still family. Surely there's a way to work this out without involving the police." I thought about Greg standing in the backyard holding my car keys, calling me a walking ATM while everyone laughed. I thought about 5 years of emergencies and rough patches and promises that were never kept. "He had a chance to work it out," I said. "Every month for 5 years, he had a chance to be honest with me. Instead, he chose to treat me like a fool." My parents left an hour later, both of them looking shell-shocked. As I watched their car pull out of the parking lot, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. For the first time since this whole thing started, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired and ready for it to be over. The district attorney's office occupied 3 floors of a converted bank building downtown, all marble floors and brass fixtures that spoke to more prosperous times. I sat in a conference room on the 2nd floor, surrounded by prosecutors, investigators, and enough paperwork to build a small fort. "Mr. Morrison," said ADA Patricia Hawkins, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s who looked like she'd prosecuted her share of financial crimes. "You've been very helpful in documenting Mr. Paulson's fraudulent activities. But I have to ask, at what point did you suspect something was wrong?" I thought about that question carefully. The honest answer was complicated. "I suspected Greg was exaggerating his success almost from the beginning," I said. "Someone who's making as much money as he claimed wouldn't need to borrow grocery money from his brother-in-law. But I assumed he was just bad at managing cash flow, not that he was actively defrauding customers. When did that change? When I started investigating his business practices after the barbecue incident. That's when I discovered the pattern of taking deposits without completing work." Ada Hawkins nodded and made a note. "We're prepared to offer Mr. Paulson a plea agreement. Restitution to all sufferers, including yourself, plus 18 months in county jail and 5 years probation. No more contractor's license, obviously." "What about the money he owes me?" "That's where it gets complicated. Mr. Paulson has no significant assets. His truck is leased, his apartment is rented, and his business account has been drained by legal fees." Even if we get a judgment, collection is going to be difficult. I'd expected as much. People like Greg didn't accumulate assets, they accumulated debts. What happens to my sister? Ms. Morrison isn't facing any charges. We don't believe she was aware of her husband's fraudulent activities, but the boutique loan you co-signed. She consulted her notes. The bank is going to want that money back. They've already started foreclosure proceedings. $45,000. I could afford it, barely, but it would wipe out most of my savings. I'll need to think about that, I said. The meeting lasted another hour, covering details about testimony and evidence and court dates. By the time I walked out of the building, the afternoon sun was slanting low between the downtown towers, casting long shadows across the plaza. My phone rang as I reached my car. "Danny, it's Vanessa." She sounded different, smaller somehow. The confident edge that had always characterized my sister's voice was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like humility. "I heard you met with the prosecutors today," she said. "News travels fast. Greg's lawyer called. He says you're cooperating with their case." "I'm telling the truth, Vanessa. That's all." There was a long pause. "I didn't know, Danny. About the customer complaints, the stolen deposits, any of it. I thought the business was struggling, but I didn't know Greg was stealing from people." "I believe you." "Do you? Because I keep thinking about all the times I defended him to you. All the times I rolled my eyes when you asked about loan payments. I made you feel like you were being petty for wanting your money back." I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, listening to my sister cry over the phone, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of tired recognition that we'd all been playing roles in a story that was bigger than any of us had understood. "Greg fooled a lot of people, Vanessa, including me. But you figured it out. You stopped enabling him. I just kept making excuses. You loved him. That's not a crime. It feels like one right now." She was quiet for a moment. "Danny, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but the boutique loan, the bank is saying they want the full amount by the end of the month. $45,000. Yes, I know it's not fair. I know you've already lost so much money because of us. But if there's any way..." I closed my eyes and thought about the spreadsheet on my computer at home. All those careful calculations, all that documentation of money loaned and never returned, numbers that represented 5 years of saying yes when I should have said no, of being the family ATM because it was easier than confronting the truth. "I'll pay it," I said. "Danny, but this is the last time, Vanessa. After this, I'm done. No more loans, no more emergencies, no more bailouts. Whatever happens to you and Greg after this, you'll have to handle it yourselves." "I understand, and Danny, I'm sorry for all of it. For laughing at the barbecue, for taking advantage of your generosity, for not seeing what Greg really was. I'm so sorry." I hung up and sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, watching office workers stream out of the surrounding buildings, everyone heading home to their own complicated lives and family dramas. Then I drove to the bank and initiated a wire transfer for $40,000. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same conference room where I'd met with the prosecutors. But this time, I was there for Greg's sentencing hearing. He'd taken the plea deal, 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and restitution orders totaling $47,000 to the customers he'd defrauded. He looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, deflated somehow. The cocky swagger that had characterized every family gathering was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders and downcast eyes of someone who'd finally run out of other people to blame. "Mr. Paulson," said Judge Martinez, a stern-faced man in his 60s who'd clearly seen his share of white-collar criminals, "you've pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and theft by deception. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say?" Greg stood up slowly, his hands shackled in front of him. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to the families I hurt. I never meant for things to go this far. I was just trying to keep my business afloat, and I made some bad decisions." It was a carefully rehearsed statement, probably written by his lawyer. It hit all the right notes: remorse, acceptance of responsibility, acknowledgement of damage to sufferers. But it didn't mention the 5 years of lies he'd told his own family, or the $130,000 he'd taken from his brother-in-law while treating him like garbage. Judge Martinez wasn't impressed either. "Mr. Paulson, this wasn't a series of bad decisions. This was a deliberate pattern of fraud that suffererized multiple families and destroyed trust in the contracting industry. The sentence agreed to in your plea agreement is 18 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You're also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $47,000 to the sufferers identified in the prosecution's case. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo in the small courtroom. As the bailiff led Greg away, he turned and looked directly at me, for the first time since this whole thing started. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, just a kind of hollow recognition. He nodded once, like he was finally acknowledging something he should have understood years ago. I nodded back. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa was waiting by the steps. She'd lost weight over the past few months, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. The boutique had closed, as expected, and she'd moved back in with our parents while she figured out what to do next. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped." She managed a weak smile. "I got a job, by the way, administrative assistant at a law firm downtown. It's not much, but it's honest work." "That's good. Danny, I know we've said this before, but thank you. For paying off the loan, for not letting me get dragged down with Greg. I know it cost you a fortune." It had cost me $175,000 in total. The boutique loan, plus all the money I'd never get back from Greg's various emergencies. My retirement account was significantly lighter, and I'd had to take out a second mortgage on the condo I'd been planning to buy. But I was sleeping better than I had in years. "You're my sister," I said. "That still means something." We stood there on the courthouse steps for a few minutes, watching lawyers and defendants and family members stream past us, all of them dealing with their own versions of justice and consequence, and trying to figure out how to move forward. "Are we going to be okay?" Vanessa asked. "As a family, I mean." I thought about that question. The easy answer was yes, of course. Family is family, and we'd all get past this eventually. But the honest answer was more complicated. "I don't know," I said. "We're going to be different. The old dynamic where I bail everyone out and pretend it's normal, that's over, but maybe different is better." Vanessa nodded. "Maybe it is." I drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook Heights, past the bus stop where I'd waited 6 months ago after walking away from that barbecue. The same houses, the same strip malls, the same traffic lights, but everything felt different now. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. "Danny Morrison." "Mr. Morrison, this is Detective Chen. I wanted to let you know that we've recovered your vehicle registration and insurance documents from Mr. Paulson's personal effects. You can pick them up at the station whenever it's convenient." "Actually, Detective, I don't need them anymore. I sold the car last month." There was a pause. "Oh, well, in that case, I'll just file them with the closed case paperwork." "Detective Chen, thank you for taking my complaint seriously. I know it seemed like a family dispute at the time. Mr. Morrison, I've been doing this job for 15 years. Family disputes are often the most serious crimes of all. People think they can get away with anything if they're related to the sufferer." After I hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes, thinking about that observation. Greg had taken my money, my car, and my dignity because he thought family relationships made him immune to consequences. And for 5 years, he'd been right, until he wasn't. I walked up to my apartment and opened the file cabinet in my home office. The thick folder labeled Paulson Gregory James was still there, full of bank statements and loan documents and evidence of a financial relationship that had finally reached its conclusion. I pulled out the folder and carried it to the kitchen, where I fed every page into the garbage disposal, one sheet at a time. The sound of paper being shredded was surprisingly satisfying. When the last document was gone, I poured myself a beer. A good one, not the cheap stuff I'd been buying while I was supporting 2 households, and sat down at my computer to check my bank balance. For the first time in 5 years, every dollar in my account belonged to me. It was a smaller number than it should have been, but it was mine. The ledger was finally closed,